and thank you for joining us at the ever-improving No Soundbites Allowed podcast. My name is Michael Vasquez. We thank you for joining us in this adventure of describing the politics that go on in our nation on a personal and local level as often as possible, giving you, the audience, more than just 30 seconds to understand what's going on in our nation. We look forward to joining you as we go. Just sit back, enjoy the ride. Please remember, if you like the episodes, like it, share it, let other people know, and if you can, please donate, even if it's $2, even if it's $5, because it all makes a difference. We thank you, and here we go. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us. That's right, this is the favorite podcast, the No Soundbites Allowed podcast, with your host, Michael Voss, the Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm looking forward to the holiday. I hope everyone is. It's going to be a great Labor Day for everyone. I hope. I'm looking forward to taking a trip and visiting some family, which is why we're doing the program on Thursday instead of the normal Friday like usual. And the Saturday Facebook Live broadcast will not happen this week because I will be away. But I hope everyone's going to have a good holiday, to be around friends, to be around family, to enjoy themselves. Hopefully everyone be careful and safe. No drunk driving out there, because obviously everyone's safety is important. And I want to have everyone come back and hear me on the show and be involved, because you matter and you're important to me. And I thank you, each and every one of you, for being here with me to come onto the program and listen in every week. You make such a big difference, and I thank you all for that. So, that being said, I do want to go over, there's a couple things I want to talk about in this episode. I want to talk a little bit about the Siena, it's a Siena and Spectrum poll that just came out about the New York 22nd race between incumbent Congresswoman Claudia Tenney and her challenger, Anthony Brindisi, who happens to be a Democrat. And the poll gives us some very interesting data, so I'll be talking a little bit about that. Obviously, the other big news, I want to talk about the debate between Governor Andrew Cuomo and Cynthia Nixon, his challenger. Both of them are, well, supposedly both are in the Democratic Party, although Cynthia Nixon is an avowed Democratic socialist. Many people would equate that to a communist, but that is her affiliation, which is at odds within the Democratic Party. So that debate was quite interesting. There's a lot of information. A lot of people are talking about it today, and they should be, because there's a lot in there that needs to be talked about. But and I want to bring that up a little bit. But before I get to those issues, two things I want to talk about is, first, I want everyone to be aware that on September 10th, I will be speaking at the SUNY Broome College here in Binghamton, New York. And everyone is invited. It's an open event. I'll be speaking about the First Amendment in relation to social media and talking about censorship and some of the other issues that are related to that. I hope everyone will be able to come and enjoy it. It'll be on September 10th. That's a Monday. And that will be at 1 p.m. it starts. There will also be a question and answer period in there. It should last until about 3 o'clock, I expect. And I'm looking forward to everyone being there and talking with you about it. And I'll give you more details as we get a little closer. Beyond that, I also want to talk about something else, which is, I think it's just silly. I think it's stupid. It's one of those things that just makes no sense whatsoever to me. I mean, it just makes no sense. It's the question of temperature. What is the temperature of an office? And what is, and you know, you could say, looking at it from Jeopardy, the answer is, what is the office temperature? The question would be, what is sexism? Think about it. That's the issue right now. It came out in an article in the New York Times on the 28th of August, and the title of the article is that, quote, can an office temperature be sexist? Women and science say so, end quote. That is the article title from the New York Times on the 28th, and I think it's just absolutely and incredibly stupid. Now, this comes from Cynthia Nixon. She's the one who started this whole thought when she was saying that she believes that a debate, going into the debate with Governor Cuomo, she wanted the temperature at 76 degrees because she believes that at 76 degrees, this is the perfect temperature for women in an office, and therefore to have it at any other temperature is sexist. And this is partially also because, or at least in part because, Governor Cuomo is known for liking cooler temperatures, well below 68 degrees, in his office. And that obviously also at the debate hall. And so this is a point of contention for them. But Ms. Nixon has gone and made this a global issue and saying that any office that has a temperature that is not 76 degrees is sexist and is a bias of men against women, because 76 degrees is the perfect temperature for women in an office. I don't see that. I mean, there is a study from 2015 that the New York Times cites saying that, quote, gender discriminating bias in thermal comfort, end quote, was the argument in the study done in 2015. I find it to be just a silly argument, in part because I believe that overall, controlling temperature in an office is mostly an economic issue. It's about the cost of regulating that temperature when the temperature is high and when it's cold, when you're talking about the winter months, and being able to have a pretty consistent, pretty steady temperature is economic. If you don't think so, ask anyone over the last 50, 75 years about maintaining the temperature in their homes, which everyone has been classically told, or at least my generation was classically told, should be 68 degrees. That wasn't because of men preferring it or women preferring it. It wasn't there because 68 degrees is considered some kind of super perfect temperature for the sexes. It's considered 68 degrees is most efficient economically for people to prevent pipes from bursting and from people sweltering. It's normally the temperature everyone's targeted because it's cost effective. When you're talking about a business, you're talking about what is cost effective. Now, there are people like myself who enjoy a warmer temperature. I like my house to be around 72 to 74 degrees. It's warm. Most people would tell me that it's warm. Men, women, kids, everyone tells me that they think that's a little bit warm for them to have the home at 72 degrees. I like it. Okay. There are a lot of people who like it below 68 degrees, and they prefer to keep their houses under that. I know a lot of people who keep their house under 68 degrees just because of the economics. It costs too much money, especially when you're dealing in upstate New York and many of the northern states where you're having to pay for that increased cost, especially 8 months out of the year where you have cold winters. Now, I believe the same problem would be down in the southern states where you're talking about air conditioning. And again, having that cooler temperature is also cost. It's a question of cost. What's the perfect temperature? I don't believe that has to do with male and female. I don't think that's about sex itself. And I don't know that there is a genetic predisposition that applies because of this. And here's a question. Let's assume that it is a genetic predisposition for temperature, which doesn't make sense. But let's say it is. And if that's the case, what about transgendered people? So if a transgendered woman wants the temperature to be higher, is that sexist because that transgendered woman, or woman who becomes a man, therefore is now seen as a man, and therefore they're being sexist against other men? I mean, it gets confusing with this stuff. The lines and the webs that they draw out here is just insane. And what about the fact that, what if you're from a different area? What if you're genetically and historically like myself? I'm Hispanic. My family, we come from Puerto Rico. So I'm a black Puerto Rican. And so my family historically, genetically have lived in warmer temperatures. And I like, as I said, warmer temperatures, 72 degrees. Is it now racist if I'm working in an office that is under 72 degrees? Does that make it somehow inherently evil and wrong because of race that they don't have a temperature at that proper temperature for me personally? And where does this end? I mean, there's so many ways to look at this. If you're looking to try and find a way to separate people, to tear people apart, to keep people separated in individual categories, well, this is another great way to do that. To start an argument that didn't exist before, that no one's really had any problem with, by saying, hey, let's separate people by sexes and by potentially by races, because we're going to argue about the temperature, rather than getting people to come together and work and have an economic benefit for all the people in the business. And ultimately, I have to say, if you're that personally upset by the temperature of an office that you are working in, or even a business, and here's a component that no one talked about, what about if you are a customer walking into that business? What if I'm walking into a business and it's under 72 degrees? What is that supposed to mean? What if it's over 72 degrees? It's not comfortable to me. Does that mean that the business is now racist or sexist because I'm not comfortable? And what about the next customer that walks in, male or female, and maybe they like the temperature even lower? Does it suddenly change whether it's sexist or racist because another customer walked into a business? We have to make these mental calculations and this mental gymnastics over what's sexist and what's racist and for whom and who is more important. Is it the customer that's more important? Or is it the workers in the business that's more important? Is the owner of the business more important? Why are these people important? And the different categories that we have to balance. Well, whose interests are the most important? The workers. What about the workers of different sexes and different races? Does that go by majority rule? Do you see how this gets stupid fast? And the only thing that is gained by this is separating people and giving them more divisions than unification. But I was making an original point in that. And I was saying, if you are that absolutely distressed, you are so distraught by the temperature of the business that you are working in, get another job. And if you can't get another job, or you don't want to get another job, there is another option. And that is start your own business and have the temperature whatever you can afford or whatever you prefer. And that's just as simple as that. You don't have to work at a business you don't like. It's the wonderful joy of being in America and having freedom. And as an American, you are completely free to get a different job. You're completely free to start your own business. And if you think that the temperature should be 92, go for it. And if you can get employees that want to work in an office or a business that's 92 degrees, fantastic. And if you don't like that, you can go out and start another business and have the temperature at 49 degrees for all I care. And if you can get employees that will work there under those temperatures, fantastic. Knock your socks off. I don't care if you're male, female, transgender, gay, straight, black, white, Asian, Hispanic. It doesn't matter. I could care less. These are choices that individuals get to make and business owners get to make individually. And if it works for them, fantastic. And if it doesn't, go get a different job. If it is that important to you and it is that essential to you, then do it. If you believe that the temperature being whatever is the ideal that's being thrown out there by whatever politician or quasi-politician, and you think that it's absolutely essential to your personal view of the world, that having a temperature anything other than this arbitrary ideal created by some academic somewhere in the world, well, then fantastic. Go get a different job. It's just that simple. Why make it more difficult? Why give more pressure and separation and division in something that doesn't need it? It's already hard enough. Everyone works every day. Everyone works hard, I like to believe. And people want to do as well as they can in their jobs, make as much money as possible in their jobs or owning the businesses that they have. They don't need extra problems and extra questions that aren't going to help them in any way, that do nothing but to separate people and create divisions and create arguments that really don't help anyone at the end of the day. Because let's assume that, again, it's an economic issue for businesses. Let's assume, or even for your personal home, that if you have it at, 76 degrees, as Cynthia Nixon suggests, and you don't have Cynthia Nixon's tens of millions of dollars that she is reportedly worth, well, your business may go out of business because you can't afford the energy bill, and then all your employees are laid off, and so they're not benefiting because they're not working and getting a steady income. You're not being helped out because you no longer have a business. You're not drawing in an income because you don't have some independent wealth from some third source coming in. You got Uncle Bob coming in, or maybe Aunt Cynthia Nixon coming over to drop a couple $100,000 a year on your business to keep it going. Well, then what are you going to do? I mean, if we actually just think about this just for a second, we find 1,000 ways that it separates people, and I don't see where it unifies anyone. I see how it causes more problems and how it advances a very political agenda, but it doesn't help anyone. It doesn't promote anything. It isn't unifying. It's just a means of separating people and pushing a partisan agenda. And that is shameful. That is sad. But I wanted to go over that because that just annoyed me. I found it to be stupid, and it just doesn't make any sense. But what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back, and let's talk a little bit about the Siena poll for the New York 22nd District and what that's saying about the race and the candidates and the population. So I look forward to talking to you in just one moment.
I had your waist. I don't even remember how you taste on my lips. Used to be something I needed. Now I see I had a reason. I was bummed out, stressed out, yeah. Think you made me feel the best I had. For a minute I thought I needed you. Now I'm seeing through all of the reasons that I made up in my head. I'm breaking the habit. I'm breaking the habit. I'm breaking the habits that I had, 'cause of where it's got me. Searching for myself, didn't know I lost me. I ain't no saint. Let the devil have a way. I regret it every day. I was bummed out, stressed out, yeah. Think you made me feel the best I had. For a minute I thought I needed you. Now I'm seeing through all of the reasons that I made up in my head. I'm breaking the habit. I'm breaking the habit. I'm breaking the I'm breaking the habit. I'm breaking the habit. I'm breaking the I'm breaking the habit. I'm breaking the
Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me back here at the No Soundbites Allowed podcast. I am always happy to hear from everyone, and I'm always happy to have you here with us. Your host is Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier, who appreciates every time that you guys come in and listen to everything. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the Siena poll. I should mention really briefly, real quick, you may notice that you've heard some commercials here. Obviously, this is a business. We try to make money wherever we can. I try to keep away from commercials as much as possible, so your donations always make a difference. But that's why you may hear some commercials in this program going forward. because we got to pay bills, like the electric bill for the temperature, to maintain the temperature. That's right. But moving forward. So yesterday, there was an announcement by Siena. Siena Spectrum did a poll for the New York 22nd race and the New York 24th race, and I believe there is a further announcement of a poll coming out later today about the New York 19th. Now, these are some of the big races in New York State, and they have some very interesting results. So, Newsflash. That's right. So the results from the Siena poll. Let's start off, first of all, with the result for the New York 24th. The polling shows that this is a race from incumbent Congressman John Katko, who has a 15-point lead over his Democratic challenger, Balter, and that race is 54% for John Katko and 39% for his Democrat challenger, Balter. That's a pretty wide difference there. And when people start talking about the blue wave, I always find it interesting because this falls right in line with what we would expect, that Katko is going to be reelected. But beyond that, looking at the New York 22nd district, that is probably one of the top 10 races in the nation. It's considered one of the most important, most competitive races in the nation. And released yesterday, everyone's looking it over today, that race has shrank. Earlier this year, some individuals were looking at the race and were quoting it as being a 7-point lead for the Democrat, Anthony Brindisi. But at this point, as of last week, from August 20th until the 26th, there was a 500-person poll that was done by Siena Spectrum News. And in that poll, taken throughout the New York 22nd district, they found that the race is essentially 2 points. They're showing that Brindisi may have a 2-point lead at 46%, versus the incumbent Claudia Tenney at 44%. That's not a lot. Now, the other thing that's very important about this, besides the fact that there is a 500 people who are involved in this poll, so it's a relatively small pool of people. There are 720,000 people in the New York 22nd district, of which there are approximately 250,000 of them are registered voters who are assigned to one party or the other. With a slight advantage for the Republican Party, the district is considered what we call R+6, or 6 points, 6 percentage points in favor of the Republican in general. So this is a pretty steady, pretty consistent Republican district. And I've been following these races since 2010. I've been following every New York 22nd race and every one of the candidates. So the blue wave seems to have disappeared, or at least shrank, down to 2 points for the Anthony Brindisi, which doesn't give much credence to a blue wave. In addition, the poll, as I said, 500 people, means that there is a plus-minus difference of 5 percentage points. So this poll may be off by 5%, which means that Anthony Brindisi theoretically could be at 41% and Claudia Tenney could be at 49%, or some mix of numbers in between there because of that 5% difference. So it's quite possible that a lot of people may be looking at the incumbent, Claudia Tenney, winning, is actually in a winning position versus Anthony Brindisi. Personally, and I think I've said this on this program before, I believe that at this moment, back in I think it was May, when the other poll was done, which showed Anthony Brindisi leading, I mentioned to people that according to my data sources, I saw the races being even. In this summer, and I would say at this point, I would probably put Claudia Tenney at 3 points ahead of Anthony Brindisi. Still a very close race. And I've said this before. I've been saying this for the last month or so. And I believe I've said it on this program. I've said it on WUTQ up in Utica on the radio, that I believe this is a very close race. And I think it's a slight lead, about 3 points to incumbent Claudia Tenney. Now, this is something that is very much up in the air. Very much in the air because Anthony Brindisi isn't well known throughout the district. He doesn't have a lot of people who know who he is. But before I get into that, what are some of the numbers that break down on this? Well, what we do know for sure is that there's at least 10% of the people who were polled that really don't know any of these either of the candidates, or they support someone else, but there is no one else in the race. So since there is no one else in the race, we assume that they don't really know either of the candidates. And that's a pretty big number there. Now, among independents, this is where the race really is, because Democrats in general vote straight down the line Democrat. Republicans pretty much vote straight down the line Republican. That's pretty consistent. And overall, we're looking at the polling showing that Democrats are pretty strongly going to vote just Democrat, and Republicans are pretty strongly going to vote just Republican. So the real question is the independents, which make up about 50% of the population in the New York 22nd District and roughly about 60% of the nation in America. And in the independent votes, individuals who are not Republicans or Democrats, well, they are looking at a race that's a 1-point difference, with 44% for Anthony Brindisi and 43% for Claudia Tenney. The big difference there is that 14% don't know either of the candidates. They're not familiar enough with Anthony Brindisi or Claudia Tenney to make up their mind on who they choose. That puts the race at a dead heat. Essentially what I've been saying since May, that this race is essentially a dead heat. It could go almost any way. But I do believe that there's a slight edge for the incumbent when we take into account the fact that when we're looking at it, the economy is doing very well. Most people are making money, even in New York State, even though Governor Cuomo and the New York State Assembly have found ways to take more money out of people's pockets, which is causing everyone, 1.2 million people, to leave the state. We do see that throughout the nation and in New York, the economy is better. More jobs are growing. The unemployment is going down. More people are finding or creating new businesses. So that has been a very big positive. And when people are happy about their economics and they feel enough safety to go out and start new businesses, we tend to see that those people are going to vote in whatever existing members of Congress are there. That's why Congress has a roughly 90%, I think it's exactly 88% re-election rate, because people like their congressman when things are going well. That's why it's almost more likely that you're going to see a politician die, a congressman die, than get voted out of office in general. And it usually isn't that bad. And again, we have a very good economy here. And I also find it interesting when you look at some of the areas. One of the things that really stood out to me is in the area that know both of these candidates the best. Anthony Brindisi is currently the assemblyman for the 118th Assembly District in New York State. And Claudia Tenney is the incumbent Congresswoman. She was the former Assemblywoman. And what we see is that in Herkimer, Oneida, and Oswego, which these areas know them very well. This is where they serve. This is part of their assembly districts. So people have known them for many years in these areas, and know the most about them. They see the most news about them. And what we see is and when you look at the race from that perspective, well, 44% of the people in Herkimer, Oneida, and Oswego are in favor of Anthony Brindisi. 46% of the people are in favor of Claudia Tenney. That's a 2-point race in her favor. When we look at the division of men and women, 51% of men, who tend to be one of the largest voting blocks in any election at any time, 51% are in favor of Claudia Tenney. 38% are in favor of Anthony Brindisi. That is a big difference. And there's 11% of men who are not familiar enough with either Anthony Brindisi or Claudia Tenney to make a decision based on this poll. At the same time, looking at women, now 54% of women are in favor of Anthony Brindisi, and 38% are in favor of Claudia Tenney. So it's almost a reversal. But the thing that makes it really different, 51% of men count more than 54% of women because men show up to vote more often than women do, which is sad because I advise everyone, I don't care who you vote for, as long as you have a reason, get out there and vote. And I would love to see women get out and vote, and I would love to see men get out and vote, and young people, old people. I expect everyone to get out there and vote. That is important. We can't have a good nation or a good state or any level of government if we don't have people out there actively voting. That is one of the essentials. So I do want to see that, and I hope more people get involved. But when I'm looking at that, and I'm seeing such a big difference in the voting, that really tells me that when I see that 51%, when there's such a big difference, I mean, you're talking about 13% divide in men who are voting for Claudia Tenney versus Anthony Brindisi. Well, that tells me that the weighting of whether or not these numbers in the poll are correct, it means that you're looking at an advantage for Claudia Tenney. And when the people who best know them also have an advantage for Claudia Tenney, then I tend to believe that while it's not 13 points, I do believe that you're looking at about a 3-point gain for Claudia Tenney as an advantage in the New York 22nd race at this moment, as opposed to Anthony Brindisi, because the people who know them best believe that Claudia Tenney is the best candidate. And when I take into account that men who make up the majority of voters in races, in elections, especially in a midterm election where there are fewer people who come out and vote, that's also going to be in his favor. And when we see that John Katko is winning by 15% over his Democratic candidate, I don't see that there's a blue wave going. So I don't see anything, and we've been looking at a lot of races. I've been following the governor's races and the primaries that have been going on across the nation, and we're not seeing enormous numbers of Democrats overall, in some locations, yes, but overall not coming out to justify this notion of a blue wave that's supposedly hitting the nation. And I think that in part has to do with the fact that, especially in New York State, when we have so many of the candidates running to the left, that's, Governor Cuomo, that's Cynthia Nixon, that's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez becoming Democratic socialists, and the growth of socialism. I think most people in New York State, as well as the nation, don't agree with socialism. I understand younger voters may be interested in that because that's what they've been taught in colleges and in high school, and they think it's some kind of great idea. But older voters, who make up the majority of the voting population, I think it's only about 18% of people who are under 30 go out and actually vote. So therefore, they nullify their own importance in elections. So it means that the older you are, the more likely you are to vote, and more likely, at least at this point in the nation, are to be against socialism, which is proven in many data points and many articles and podcasts I've talked about. So that's where I believe the race is. Really and honestly and directly, the race is almost entirely based on, in this poll, in this snapshot, it's going to be, the big things are how many Democrats come out to show up, because I don't think that's going to be the blue wave kind of numbers. I think it'll be pretty much what we've seen standard in every midterm election. And if that is the case, then the next biggest group would be men. And based on men being more often voting, then you'll see that Claudia Tenney is actually in favor by 3 points. Just to give people some background on how some of the way these calculations are done and how everyone figures out, well, who's winning, who's losing, how did they figure it out? That's kind of the process that people go through to figure out these numbers. Not always correct. I mean, didn't work. When you're looking at 2016, same kind of analysis was done by a lot of people, and almost everyone said that Hillary Clinton would win, and the actual race turned out to be not that. And the fact that President Trump has come out in favor of Claudia Tenney is supporting her both with fundraising, and it is rumored that he may be coming out to hold a rally in the New York 22nd District to further put his support behind her. And the fact that every time that President Trump has put his support behind a race, I believe every single one except one has, every candidate he supported has won in the race they've been in. We have strong belief, I have a strong belief, that you're looking at least a 3-point, possibly as much as a 5-point lead for Claudia Tenney over Anthony Brindisi. None of this is based on my personal knowledge of Anthony Brindisi and or Claudia Tenney. I know them both. I've known them both for years. Anthony about 5 years, Congresswoman Claudia Tenney for about 6. And I am a conservative Republican. So I'm truly trying not, I want to disclose that, not like it's a secret or anything. And I've supported Claudia Tenney in the past. That's not a secret either. I've publicly stated that many, many times. But I'm looking at the numbers, and the numbers are not biased. I believe that in looking at the numbers and doing a proper analysis like any other race that I've done since 2010 in many elections, the numbers are saying there is something, a result that's slightly different than the headline. Because we see headlines all the time. I mean, every time you see the numbers on the unemployment, that's not really the big number. That's not the thing that's important. Look at the number, when you look at every time they come out with the unemployment, go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and look up the number of self-employed, because that's telling you the engine of growth. 70% of all jobs come from people who own their own businesses. So if we see that that number is growing and there are more people who are self-employed and creating businesses, then the economy is going to be better. More people will get jobs and the unemployment will go down in the future. It means we have a healthy economy. That's what we see now since Trump has been in office. But if we look at President Obama during his time, consistently, throughout the entire 8 years that he was president, we saw that the number of people who were out creating new businesses was on a decline, which means that less people were actually working, which the number of people who were not counted as unemployed but not working was growing. You don't have to believe me. Look up the data. It's right there. So you can figure that out for yourself. But with all that said, I'm going to take another quick break here and take a sip of water. And then we'll come back and we'll talk about Governor Cuomo, Cynthia Nixon. Wow, that was a really interesting debate. But we'll come back and we'll talk about that in just a moment.
I say, lady, I'm feeling like we ain't got no damn patience. Excuses why we cannot do this face to face, and then we cry, wonder why we ain't on the same damn page. If there's one thing I know, it's that this world keeps turning, and no one seems concerned. Whoa, that this world keeps turning. That's one thing I learned. 'Cause mama don't sleep at night since the sun done up and died. Ain't no brother's keeper, and no one looking out for the sisters neither. And these families ain't no families. No one giving second chances. I don't understand why. It seems like this world keeps turning. No one seems concerned. Yeah, lady, I'm feeling like you don't seem to be the same way. Excuses, but it's written on your face, and then we fight another night. This time we've been wasting. No, I don't understand why we could have it all and throw it all away. Just 'cause everything we want don't go our way. Why? Just take a look outside, people losing lives. I'm just trying to see this world is much bigger than you and I. make this all okay. No excuses, girl, we need to find a way and take our time and do this right before this all fades away. Cause if there's one thing I learned, it's that this world keeps turning. There's one thing I've learned, it's that this world keeps turning. No one seems concerned. It's that this world keeps turning. No one seems concerned. It's that this world keeps turning. No one seems concerned.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us back at the No Soundbites Allowed podcast. I really enjoy and I look forward to having everyone here with me as we're getting ready for Labor Day, and we're going to have fun. Everyone's going to enjoy it, I hope, and I'm looking forward to that, and I hope everyone's going to have a great time. Now, as I mentioned, we've gone over a couple things. So we've talked about how the office temperature is just sexist, which is just silly to me. Absolutely stupid idea. You may disagree. Please let me know. If you can find some data that scientifically says that that's absolutely true and that we should be separating and making different temperature zones in an office for everybody's different sex, body weight, preference, and everything, fantastic. Show me the evidence that makes more sense that way. I generally think that, what we have right now is a lot more sensible, which means own your own business. I do encourage people, own a business. Best idea you could possibly have. We also went over a little bit on the Siena Spectrum poll that was released on the 29th last night on the New York 24th race, which is showing John Katko, the incumbent, winning by 15 points, and the race for the New York 22nd district, which currently shows them essentially in a dead even heat, with a 2-point lead towards Anthony Brindisi, with a 5-point margin plus minus for either candidate. And why my analysis, looking at the numbers of the poll, show, and I believe, a 3-point lead actually for Claudia Tenney at this moment. Again, that's an analysis. You may disagree, but please look at the poll. You may see other data there than I'm speaking about, and that's not based on anyone's preference. If you have a reason to like either of those candidates, fantastic, go for it. But let's also finally speak about the race between Governor Andrew Cuomo and Cynthia Nixon, which is a Democratic. It's up for the primary, which this year will be on September 13th. Normally it would be September 11th, that Tuesday, but because it's September 11th, they're going to push off the primary for September to the 13th, which will be that Thursday. And in September 13th, which is a Thursday, please come out and vote. That is the most important thing. No matter who you vote for, no matter what you believe, come out and vote. Now, because it's a Democratic primary for that race, only Democrats will be able to be involved. If you're in the New York 22nd district, and you're a Republican, you won't be able to vote on that, but you will have other races that you may be able to run on or to vote on. Please check your local Board of Elections. Find out if there is a race that you can vote on in the September 13th primary day and be involved. Please be involved. I think that's the most important thing. Have a reason, pick a candidate based on that reason, and vote, because nothing changes and nothing improves if we don't vote. So I do want to say that. Now, looking at the debate that happened yesterday between Governor Cuomo and Cynthia Nixon. Cynthia Nixon is the extreme far left of the party. She is one of the Democrat socialists. She jumped onto the bandwagon after Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez came out and won in her debate, her primary against, Joe Crowley. That's it. The Democrat Joe Crowley, who was the incumbent for the New York 14th district. Was it the 14th or 19th? I forget. But Ms. Ocasio-Cortez has become a darling of the Democratic Party. The Democratic National Chairman, Tom Perez, has said that that this is the new wave for the Democratic Party, that Tom Price, and the Democratic Party is now moving towards the democratic socialist or socialism or communism end of the spectrum of the far left. And because of that movement, because of the national attention, the greater discussion on socialism, we then saw Cynthia Nixon come out. She also joined on to that, saying that she too was a democratic socialist. And Governor Cuomo didn't quite go that far. He has been running to the left, but he hasn't gone so far as Cynthia Nixon to say that he's a socialist. Instead, he just said that he doesn't think America's great and never thought that America was great. Take that as you will. That's what he said. That's, I'm paraphrasing, but those are his words. America's not great. It was never that great. That's Governor Cuomo. Insane. And if that didn't end his race for 2020 for president, I don't know what will. Stephen Colbert agrees with me. He thinks it was the dumbest thing a politician could say. And I truly believe that ended his hopes of becoming the Democrat national candidate for the 2020 presidential race. But if you listen to the debate yesterday, August 29th, it's about just under 1 hour. It's about 57 minutes long. And wow, this was personal. It was very personal. They do not like each other. Cynthia Nixon, Andrew Cuomo, they do not like each other. And they definitely don't agree with each other. Cynthia Nixon, as an example, is in favor of, they're both in favor of labor unions. And both of them are upset that the Supreme Court decided that labor unions or any unions cannot take the mandate that members of the union have their funds taken, have their dues taken and used in favor of supporting candidates that the individuals don't support. So if you're not a Democrat, you're in a union, and they're trained to take dues to go support Democrats, they can't do that anymore, according to the Supreme Court. That's the Janus decision. And both of them are upset with that and want labor unions to be able to continue to donate to Democrats, and they're fighting against that. They believe that everything wrong in New York State and in the nation is the fault of President Trump. They both said so. It took them about 4 minutes into the debate. The first answer by Governor Cuomo is Trump's the problem. The answer to everything is Trump is the problem. And they repeatedly, throughout the entire debate, back and forth, mostly by Governor Cuomo, to be honest, said that President Trump is the problem. You would think that President Donald Trump was running for governor of New York. He was mentioned so much in this debate. He was called the problem. You would think that he was the governor of New York because he's being referred to so much. He's the president of the United States. He's not running for governor of New York, and yet he is the top topic between the two Democratic candidates. It's kind of sad. Really, really sad, because there are bigger issues here. Now, some of the other things they talked about, besides whether or not donations should be able to be made by unions to Democrats based on the money they take away from its members. Besides that, they also happen to talk about, they introduced themselves, Cynthia Nixon believes that illegal aliens should be allowed to have a driver's license in New York State. That's a really interesting thought, because let's remember, illegal aliens, whether you want to call them undocumented or otherwise, undocumented because they don't have a document showing that they have authorization to be in the United States. Because they illegally entered the United States, they are illegal aliens. They are criminals in the United States. That is a definition. That is a fact. You cannot circumvent that. But Cynthia Nixon, if she were to become governor, believes that you can circumvent that, and that these illegal aliens should be rewarded with a driver's license so that they can drive on the roads. I don't know why we would want to do that and reward their criminal action by giving them rights and benefits. But Cynthia Nixon seems to believe that is the way to go. Governor Cuomo is more ambivalent on that and isn't quite sure. In terms of single-payer health care, which is now very classically by Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the socialist factions of the Democratic Party. They call this Medicaid for all. And just as it is on the national level, all analysis of it on the state level show that this is absolutely unaffordable. As brought up by the moderators, it would cost approximately $139 billion for New York State to have a Medicare for all. And with that, both Cynthia Nixon and Governor Cuomo were asked very simply and very directly, if you go in that direction, if you try to have Medicare for all, how would you be able to pay for it? And the answer is from Cynthia Nixon, well, it saves money for people, and it's a great idea, and everyone has a right to health care, so we'll do it. Except none of that's correct. You don't have a right to health care. It's nowhere in the Constitution. It's not in any of the amendments. That is not a right. That is a choice. That is a personal choice. It's a choice that many people should have, and I agree with giving people options, but it is not an absolute requirement of life. It is not an option. It is not a right. So she's wrong there. And that doesn't answer the question that it costs $139 billion. Now, to give you an idea, that virtually doubles the New York State annual budget just by itself. Literally, it would increase taxes for the average family in New York State by 3 times. 300% increase in taxes just to pay for this. Literally, if you increased it and didn't change anything else in New York State would not be able to pay for that and pay for anything else. It costs that much money. And the question is, would it be better in terms of health care? Would it help anyone? And the answer is no. As a matter of fact, there was just an announcement today on Twitter, in fact, and I will read that to you in just a moment. There was an announcement by, well, hang on, I'm bringing it up here because it just came out on Twitter just about when I just started this. And I believe that was about an hour ago that the announcement came out. Newsflash. Yes. So, as being reported by the State of Politics, which is part of Spectrum News, there was an announcement that a letter backed by a coalition of state and local businesses coming together, in particular by the Business Council president, that they oppose Medicare for all. They do not agree with Cynthia Nixon. They do not agree with Governor Cuomo. They do not believe that this is an effective program that could work. As for Governor Cuomo, what he said is, well, we need this to happen at a national level for it to work on the state level, and therefore we need a Democratic president, and then attacked President Trump. Sounds pretty consistent for him. Cynthia Nixon, for her part, says, yes, we need a Democratic president, but we need to do this at the state level to prove that it can work, and therefore it'll be able to be made national. So far, all evidence has shown that it hasn't worked on a state level, nor has it worked. We don't know about federal because it hasn't been done in the United States, but it hasn't worked on a single state that has tried it. Going on, what else did they argue about? Well, corruption was a really interesting subject and really tense between the two candidates. Governor Cuomo basically glossed over the fact that he's had an administration that has completely surrounded him by corruption at every level. In particular, speaking about Mr. Percoco, a gentleman that he called his other brother and a close associate and ally of his, and he threw him under a bus, saying that Mr. Percoco made stupid decisions, and he was amazed. And he had no idea whatsoever that there was any of this corruption happening all around him, the Buffalo Billions, Mr. Percoco, and all the other individuals that have been convicted, not just accused, but convicted of corruption, Sheldon Silver and so forth, and that he had no idea about this. The response from Miss Nixon was that, well, that means you're either incompetent or you're complicit, and you just haven't been caught. And Mr. Cuomo did not like that. So these are a couple of interesting things. In terms of legal marijuana, it was quite interesting because basically legalizing marijuana, Ms. Nixon is very much for it and didn't mention at all about whether or not if a parent, the question was, what would you tell a parent who is telling their kids not to do drugs, marijuana and otherwise? And her answer was, well, marijuana would be great. It's really, if we don't legalize it, well, then it's racist. And it'll bring in a lot of money, and we can use that money for fixing education because education is racist. And it'll be just like gambling, which is kind of interesting because throughout this entire debate, we often heard Cynthia Nixon going back to racism, sexism, everything's an ism, that's a problem, and the only way to solve it is by being socialist. Because, that's just the answer to everything pretty much. Without actually addressing, well, how do you pay for these things? How are people going to be affected about this? Is this the best choice? Governor Cuomo, for his part, was looking forward to the fact that New York is now the capital of progressivism in the United States, and that he believes everyone in New York State agrees with him and enjoys that. I don't think that's correct because we keep losing people. We're losing over 100,000 people per year. We've lost 1.2 million people, projected to lose approximately 1.5 million people at this rate. And so the people who don't agree that New York is great as a progressive capital have been leaving en masse, and that has been hurting the state in terms of revenues and taxes, in terms of population, in terms of power in Congress. We're losing congressmen. We're about to lose 2 more members of Congress by 2020 when the census comes down. We have had no positive benefit by becoming the capital of progressivism in the nation, which has been a goal of Governor Cuomo. And it was also not a positive when he, again, agreed that, not legalizing marijuana is somehow racist, that this is a factor of racial injustice, which is, also affecting housing and jobs, and that he would look to use the funds for legalizing marijuana, not for education, but to improve the state. Otherwise, he did not explain what that is. Now, here's one of my big things I want to talk about with that. Let's assume, as Governor Cuomo believes, in the next year that New York State legalizes marijuana. So we have a generation of kids who will grow up using marijuana, and as former governor of California, Jerry Brown, said, we have a bunch of kids who are high and not focused. Fine. So that's what New York becomes. And we make more money. We bring in the money from drugs that will be used by children because it's legal at that point, if it isn't already being used by kids. And that will help those kids become high and less effective. Fantastic. We bring in a bunch of money. And what are we going to use it for? Well, if it's like gambling, think about it. The argument for bringing in casinos into New York State is, well, we're going to make a lot more money and we can use that money for the infrastructure and education. Except it's losing money and no money's going into education or the infrastructure. We're spending it in other places. We're spending more than we can bring in. It's not going anywhere near where it's supposed to. Why do we believe for even a half a second that if we were to legalize marijuana, the extra income is going to go anywhere like where they're saying? That we're suddenly going to do exactly what we did with gambling. So we're supposed to spend the money on education, except it never gets there. Or we're going to spend it on infrastructure, except the money never gets there. This is not a long-term positive for us. And again, it doesn't resolve the problem that we're spending more money than New York State can bring in. That is why the comptroller for New York, Tom DiNapoli, stated that by 2020, New York State will be $18 billion more in debt than we are at this time. Those were his saying. We have an $18 billion deficit increase in our state budget. So we're not improving things. It's not getting better. We're spending so much money we can't possibly keep up. And the next governor is going to walk into that massive debt increase that we can't do anything about. We can't stop it. It's going to happen. All we can do is try and do something to adjust afterwards and reduce it if we can. These are not the ideas that have long-term benefits for it. We did learn, though, something that was very important, is that in terms of state troopers, Cynthia Nixon mentioned that she is looking to decrease the total number of troopers in New York State. She wants to reduce the police force. Now, I'm sure that Matt Ryan, who's running for locally in the southern tier, he's running for the Broome County Sheriff's Department, and he also wants to remove the number of police. Both of them believe that this would be racially just. It's a matter of racial injustice. It's racism, that there are so many police out there and that the police follow the law and arrest people for committing crimes. So the answer to that is not to change the laws, not to help guide people so that they don't think that committing crimes is a good thing. No, their answer is have less police, then they can't arrest as many people. That's stupid. That's anarchy. It doesn't help anyone. It doesn't resolve the underlying core problem. All it does is lets a problem fester and become worse because you're not addressing it at all. They're basically turning a blind eye. But that's what Cynthia Nixon believes, that we should have less state troopers, just like Mayor Matt Ryan, running for Broome County Sheriff, believes less sheriffs, and therefore more crime can happen. But, that'll be good because, that'll be less racism because we aren't paying attention to the crime that's happening. This is stupid. I tell you, there is so much more in this. I can't possibly go over it. I could do an entire show just on that debate. And I know many people have, but I wanted to give you my insights on it and what I thought about it. I think it's absolutely insane. Neither of these individuals should win the race, but it is almost entirely likely that we'll see Governor Cuomo win the primary, and he will be challenging Mark Molinaro and Larry Sharpe for the Libertarian Party. Mark Molinaro being the Republican candidate. And he's going to face Larry Sharpe, who is the Libertarian candidate. And it is quite possible that we're going to see Cynthia Nixon continue to run as the Working Families Party. There is another party in New York, and that is one of them. And she will be a candidate against Governor Cuomo. So there'll be two Democrats, a Republican and a Libertarian in the race. Those are the ones that really count. The Green Party doesn't count. There's another party that started. They don't count. They'll be lucky to get 1%, maybe 2% of the total vote. So there's your race. Those are your choices. Governor Cuomo, Mark Molinaro, Larry Sharpe. And of those three, right now, the weighting goes towards Governor Cuomo. And that's a really, really sad thing. Because we know that in the last 8 years, we've lost 1.2 million people. We've lost tens of thousands of jobs, and we've lost a couple $2 billion in revenue. No one's being helped. Having him continue to be here is not going to help anyone. But if you don't go out and vote, guaranteed things will continue in the same process that we've seen. We will have more corruption and less effective governance because if we're not voting, politicians don't care. That is just a fact. But that just gives you a little bit of my thoughts here as we go into Labor Day weekend, some things to think about. As always, I look forward to any of your comments, any of your thoughts, any of your statements. And I will see you back next week in the month of September, and I will have fun talking with you. I look forward to hearing from everyone then. Have a great holiday, people. Oh, and show up at the SUNY Broome College on September 10th for my speech on the First Amendment because it'll be fun. And I'm looking forward to seeing you there.